So, as I said in my last video, well, first of all, let me just reiterate that there are quite a number of comedians who play at the Comedy Store in LA, let's say, who also come from the martial arts world. Okay? So they do both, which is very ironic. And now, all these cats, because Joe Rogan has been so successful with his podcast, if you're a comedian in LA and you do martial arts, you need a podcast, and there's a lot of these people doing this. So naturally, I started writing my comedy special probably about 6 months ago, and then, and obviously now I'm starting a podcast, which, I had been planning for years and just didn't do it. I actually shot a few episodes a long time ago, but obviously I didn't follow through. So, and so what did I do today? I looked up to see, do they offer jiu-jitsu in this little podunk town that I'm in Montana? And they do, on Tuesdays. But, Thomas Jefferson said something to the effect of, in all things, do your own thing. Make up your own mind. But when it comes to fashion, follow the crowd. Something like that. That's paraphrasing. Well, right now, in these United States, it's fashionable to do comedy. It's fashionable, apparently, to do jiu-jitsu. And it's fashionable to have a podcast. So, follow the crowd, which is what I'm doing. So, this morning, I've been watching, and I was watching Eddie Bravo, and I don't know whose podcast he was on. What's his name? Theo Vaughn. And what I noticed is these guys they were talking about sexuality, okay? But the only kind of sexuality they'll talk about, or at least Eddie Bravo, is prepubescent, when I figured it out, masturbation, that kind of stuff. Funny little stories that come from that era in life, right? But what I started noticing is that these guys will talk about that kind of thing, but they won't talk about past relationships. And I realized it's because they're married. Of course they're not going to talk about past relationships. They don't want to piss their wives off, And, I'm already warning myself not to talk about past relationships on my podcast because I'm not married right now, but maybe I will be. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe I will be again. I was married 7 years the first time, 18 years the second time, and or 19, and who knows what the future holds. But I see no reason not to talk about past relationships, especially if it's entertaining. So, I started thinking about, like just how wrong some of the entanglements I've found myself in. I didn't have too many girlfriends, and I didn't have too few. I kind of had a regular amount, I would say. What I think is a regular amount of people. And, but, in that regular amount, did I find myself in some entanglement? Yes. So, I started thinking about this girl. I'm going to call her Jackie. Her name wasn't Jackie, but maybe she'll end up watching it. Who knows? I don't want to, I don't want to out anybody. Her name is pretty close to Jackie. It's pretty close. It's damn close. So we'll call her Jackie. Anyway, so I, ended up with this girl. I ended up somehow living with this girl, Jackie. She was my girlfriend. And there was another guy who lived in the house who had fallen in love with her, and he was all fucked up about it. And he would come to me and say, "Why did you end up with her? I was in love with her. You fucked me over." And he'd cry, and and by the way, this Jackie is, if there's ever a 10, this girl was a 10. She was beautiful. She was exceptionally good looking. Blue eyes, and everybody believes those big blue eyes, So a friend of mine who was older, his name was Shifty. That's what he went by. He had done some time. He was older than me by about 10 years. He comes to me one morning and says, "Listen, I got to tell you something, man. Jackie was out at the ski valley today. We lived in a ski town. I worked in town. Jackie worked at the ski valley, where all the guys went out there and skied every day. He said she came up to me this morning. I was changing clothes. She said, 'Hey, let me give you a blowjob.' So I did it. But I wanted to tell you. I wasn't going to say no, but I thought you should know, since she's your girlfriend." So my tack on this one is, I thought I loved this girl, but certainly I wasn't. If somebody was going to leave the relationship, it wasn't going to be me, right? Because she's beautiful, and I like long dicking. You know what long dicking is? Long dicking is where you stick your big old long dick into your girlfriend. So I was long dicking Jackie. Long dicking is a prison term, apparently. I don't know. I learned it back then. So anyway, so I don't wanna leave. And meanwhile, like I said, and then some other people were kind of hinting like that what she did was she went out there to work, but then after work, these guys would get off the mountain and everybody, apparently fuck Jackie, right? Anyway, I didn't leave her right then. But one day, and the reason I bring this up is one day she's sitting naked on a chair and produces a whole handful, I swear to God, of cottage cheese out of her vagina. Right? And, I inspected it because I was like, what is going on? I go and look, and I didn't smell it, but I did look at it, and it did not bear it bore every resemblance to cottage cheese. It looked exactly like cottage cheese. I've never seen this before, never seen it since. But there that was. Some cottage cheese, And, I didn't make too big of an issue out of it. I think she said it was an infection maybe or something. I don't even know. She worked it out, And, this was back in the day where a lot of people were in this town and, of course, all over the world, everybody's swapping spit. And, STDs were a thing. And I remember I ended up with this STD called human papilloma virus, HPV, which is very dangerous for women. They can end up with cancer. And, now they inoculate 12-year-olds against it, which they should. I hope my daughter's been inoculated. But, so I ended up with this tiny little thing, and I have a doctor get rid of it for me. But apparently once you have it, you're a carrier. 70% of the world's population, adult population, carry HPV. So apparently I transferred this to Jackie, right? But whereas with me, it was just the tiniest little, you better see it, but with her, immediately there was this bloom, and, I'm looking at it, and it was just like all these, it looked like one of those things where you look up STDs on the internet and those pictures of ones that, like gonorrhea, or syphilis, where it's just so unbelievable that you can't imagine the person ever getting better. And that's kind of how it was, I'm looking at this and it's a full bloom. It's everywhere, just kind of these growths, and they're kind of like warts, but they're kind of not. It's more like a little part of a tree or something, like a flesh tree. And it is all over her vagina, and I just remember we were traveling in Costa Rica at the time, and we're way out in the middle of nowhere. No doctors. There was no doctor within many, many, many kilometers, miles and miles and miles. We're stuck. And there had been a flood, so our little town had turned into an island, and we couldn't get off the island. There was no boat. There was no doctor, but I loved Jackie. I loved Long Dick and Jackie. So I went ahead and I said, I already have it. So there's no reason for me not to just keep doing what I'm doing, which I did. I went ahead and long dicked her some more. Anyway, that's my Jackie story. I got to take a break. We'll be right back with more. So, excuse me. I was just checking out like how long people generally watch podcasts for, and I'll tell you, for me, it depends on if they're listening or watching, right? So if people are at work listening, they might go through the whole thing. I think people click away pretty quickly if the subject matter isn't pretty tantalizing. I was just watching a Joe Rogan podcast with Duncan Trussell. It might have been a Duncan Trussell podcast with Joe Rogan. No, I think it's the other way around. Which tend to be pretty interesting. And, in this particular, they're having a conversation about psychedelics and sort of the kind of drugs. Well, let's just go to Joey Diaz, who made the decision very early on to go with cocaine, and he did that for decades, and it wasn't good for his life, and that kind of thing. And so, Joe Rogan, who doesn't seem to, I don't think he's ever tried that, or methamphetamine, heroin, stayed away from those kind of things, and yet, at least later in life, promotes the ideas of the natural botanicals, right? So marijuana, mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, the naturally occurring psychedelics. So they were having a talk about this, and Duncan Trussell was talking about a guy who took some ayahuasca and was having that very intense experience. I've only tried ayahuasca twice, and both times I got them, the ingredients and cooked it myself, and it's a couple of days process, and you're kind of you're doing it, but you're also praying at the same time. It's a very spiritual thing. Both times I had really great experiences, very good time. Felt very close to Mother Earth, feeling like the medicine did get you completely in touch with plant life and with the Gaia, Mother Earth spirit herself, right? Which is what ayahuasca does. But for a lot of people, they see demons, They see there's an early period of it where, there's this constant apparition, or not apparition, spirit of kind of demon faces and snakes and that kind of thing. And, you have to fight your way through that. I didn't have to, and, maybe I would if I tried it again. I don't know. But both times, I didn't have any of that. So, and I haven't tried DMT. I'm a little bit spooked by that one, but under the right circumstances, I might try it. It's naturally occurring in the brain, and apparently these, sort of voyages can be very good for you and teach you a lot on a spiritual level. Well, they're talking about this guy who took ayahuasca, was having a really bad time, and went up on top of a bridge and jumped off and killed himself. Kind of a bummer right there, but it reminded me of a different story, which I'm going to tell right now, rather than go on the botanicals conversation. When I was probably, I guess I was 17 or 18, in high school for sure, probably 17, and no, I'm sure I was 17, and we were having a party at my house, and probably about 50 people showed up, and I have a twin sister and a younger sister, so we're, we had some of the same friends, and some, branched out into our own sets of friends, but these people when we had a party, it was a pretty good time, and sometimes 50 or 75 people would show up, and it would be crazy. So we're having this party, and this kid from a grade below me who lived like just around the corner, and he was not a popular person. He was very withdrawn and kind of goth, and he wore a long coat, and he shows up in this long coat, and he's got his hand in his jacket, and every once in a while he pulls out this bottle of whiskey and drinks some. He puts it back in the coat. But my little sister comes to me and says, she was, well, she skipped a grade, so she was in our grade, but really she was a year younger. So she comes and says, he's been following me around the whole house, and he won't stop it. I keep telling him to leave me alone. He won't do it. And he's standing right there while she's saying this. So I said, okay, man, you got a choice. I'm not going to, if you'll stop doing that, you can stay here at this party, but if not, I'm going to throw you out. And she started walking away, and he started following her. I grabbed him. I took him. I threw him out our kitchen door, and there were some steps. And he was drunk, and he went face first, and he landed on his face. So, I felt bad about it, but he was bothering my sister, and I just closed the door and went back to the party, About 2 hours later, this guy shows up. He comes back in, same deal, his eyes are blood red, He's got his hand in his jacket still, and the party's kind of winding down. A bunch of people had already left, and standing in my kitchen, and all of a sudden, this guy, he's had his hand in his jacket, he brings it out, and he's got this big, long kitchen knife. And immediately when I saw it, we were in my kitchen, and I remembered that my dad had an even longer kitchen knife. I'm talking about like French style, big, long knife. And I know immediately that this guy is intent on running me through. He's going to stab me. And that's a big knife. So I back up, and literally I reached behind me because I knew exactly where my dad's knife was in the kitchen, and I grab the handle, and I bring it out, and this guy, he starts lunging at me, and I have got this knife, and I came down as hard as I could, chopping. This is a knife fight, all of a sudden, too. Chopping, as hard as I can. And, I just remember what I saw. And what I saw was, as I came down, he had that knife like this, and my knife came down, and I split his thumb down to the bone right here, like 2 inches down, 2.5 inches. Split his thumb right in half. That knife was so sharp. My dad, he kept that knife sharp, my dad. And I split his thumb in half. So I kick his knife away, and I throw him out once again, And this is horrible. What we found out the next day was this guy, there was a department store about 2 blocks away, and he had walked down there 2.5, it was 2.5 blocks away. It was called Cox's, and he walked down there, and somehow he climbed up on the roof and dove off and broke his neck, his back, and he was a quadriplegic from that day on, from that night on. I mean, literally, right after I chopped his thumb, that's what he did. And, he was in some hospital somewhere that I didn't know, and I thought about going down to visit him, and, but this is the shitty part. I just never did. And the fucked up thing is, if he's still alive, and I think he probably is, why wouldn't he be? He's only a year younger than me. He's been in a bed since that night. Unable to move. Unable to commit suicide, right? I had another friend in Albuquerque. He wasn't really a friend. He was kind of a criminal. His name was Skadge. And he bit off a guy's thumb in a fight one day. Another friend of mine ended up without a thumb. And one day I was over at Skadge's house, and he brings down a jar from behind something, and that guy's thumb was in that jar. He bit it off. But the thing about Skadge was he was into drugs really heavy, methamphetamine. And he ended up having a shootout with cops in Albuquerque. He got paralyzed from the neck down. And then, within 2 days, they found him dead in his hospital bed. And somebody, one of his friends, probably somebody I knew, had brought in a hot shot of heroin because he says, bro, I'm not going to live in a bed for the rest of eternity, in a jail. I'm not doing it. So do me the good favor. I'm done. And whoever it was did it for him. Maybe I don't know if I knew the person or not. Of course, there's a lot of crime and drugs in Albuquerque, and I was going to art school, but I did see a lot of stabbings and murders and stuff. And Skadge got killed. He got shot by the cops, and then somebody brought him some heroin. Wild. I'm going to take a break. Be back with the next installment. So, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I just found out my son has the flu. Terrible flu. He lives with his mom, but my daughter comes back every other week, and I think I've got this thing. I didn't get a flu shot this year, and I'm starting to feel really rocky. It doesn't matter so much because, like I said earlier, I'm kind of wondering about how long a podcast ought to be. Like, how much time do people have to sit around and watch me jack my jaw? I was thinking about LA, and if you've never lived in LA, it is it's the most wonderful place. It's it's a tale of two cities, because when it's great in LA, it doesn't get any better. You go to a party in the Hollywood Hills, or you wake up and have lemon juice on some veranda overlooking the city, and the weather's perfect, and you go in and watch a movie, or go to the observatory, Griffith Park, or whatever. And I used to live on Mount Washington, and that was just such a beautiful area, near about 2 miles up from Dodger Stadium on the 110, on the way to Pasadena. And I lived on this mountain, Mount Washington, and it was just the most beautiful place. But on a bad day, it's when you're in traffic, or you're tired and you got to go and do something, and it can be overwhelming too. I remember one time I just saw Michael Rapaport on, let's see, Nick Turturro on Joey Diaz, the Church of What's Happening Now podcast. And it's funny, I always loved Michael Rapaport, and one time I was at a party in LA, and he was there, and I remember, all of a sudden the party cleared out. Parties in LA are really weird. Like, all of a sudden everyone can decide to go to a club or whatever, and it can be a huge party and all of a sudden everybody's gone. That happened several times. But I remember the house was kind of dark, and somehow I started running, and Michael Rapaport was running, and we smashed noses, that butting heads thing, when you conk each other out. That was, and I had written a screenplay, and I thought he would be great for the part, and I told him so, and, Rapaport, he's like, okay, call my agent, bye. And he runs off. And I don't remember if I ever did call his agent. I probably did, but I never saw him again until, actually, well, of course I saw him on ESPN or whatever he was at. I saw him doing sports, and then I think he just did a series with I think it's Jennifer Jason Leigh, and it was such a great show because it's Rapaport, and he's just such a singular person. He's so weird, and great in himself. I think I was watching him on some interview. Oh, it was on Colbert, and I think Colbert was trying to insinuate that he was autistic. That he was not, I don't know, retarded or whatever. And then Rapaport came back and was talking about Colbert's ear being, off on, it's kind of funny on his head. Anyway, Rapaport. But I think about going back to LA, and doing comedy, or, getting into that scene. And I don't know, it's a daunting idea. I don't know. I'm thinking, I've been looking at Albuquerque. That's where I went to art school. Been thinking about going back there. There's it's high crime, and it has the highest bank robberies, the highest number of bank robberies per year, about 1,200, about 4 a day in Albuquerque. 1,200 people a year decide to rob a bank, and a lot of them get away with it. I don't know what it is. I may have said this already, but I remember 25 years ago, it was that way then, bank robberies. It had the highest, it's always had the highest number of bank robberies. But it also, I remember, a lot of really rough people show up. And sometimes friends of mine would have friends who would get out of prison, and they would show up in our scene. And some of these guys were murderers, And there were, I had friends, girlfriends and stuff, who didn't mind that for some reason, And, I think one guy had been in Rikers Island or something, got out, came to Albuquerque. He killed like 4 people. I don't know how he got out of prison. But, it was the kind of thing where you could tell his eyes were kind of cross-eyed. And you could tell when this guy was getting kind of pissed off and that he might decide, you didn't know. if he was going to decide to kill you. I remember one of his friends, there are a lot of people down on Central in Albuquerque, near the university where I lived. There were a lot of people who were out in the street with either signs or, trying to get money from people going by. And a friend of this guy, rough, big biker dude, went and killed some of these homeless guys on the street. And, I found out about it. And somebody came to me and said, we know that you better not fucking tell, because if you tell, we're going to kill you. The message got right to, because I found out that they had done it. And then, so that murderer had a little brother who was 12 years old. And there used to be a restaurant, well, there still is a restaurant called The Frontier. It's been there for 75 years, 100 years, on Central in Albuquerque, open all night. And a friend of mine named Marilyn had gone out on a date with this black guy. And I was standing there when they walked out of the restaurant, and this guy's little brother, he was 12 years old, ran up and stabs this black guy. He shanks him, And that kid knew who I was, and, he had his friends with him, but I had it, with the killing bullshit. So I called the cops right away and pointed out who had done it, who'd done this stabbing, and that kid was in a patrol car yelling at me saying, I'm telling my brother we're going to come and fucking kill you. And I think I stayed for another 3 weeks, and finally I said, you know what? My days are numbered. And I ended up moving up to Taos, to northern New Mexico. I didn't want to get shanked. So anyway, that's going to do this episode. I'm going to cut it short. I'm feeling the flu, so cut it short, and we'll do another podcast another day. We'll see you.